World leaders, including President Yoon Suk-yeol, are traveling to Peru this week to attend the Apec summit, during which attendees will reaffirm commitment to collaboration with broader focus on resilience and sustainable growth. With more Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome. It's Monday, November 11th here in South Korea. I'm Min Sun-hee and you're watching Press Perspective, our daily panel session with members of the press as well as pundits on issues affecting Korea and its partners. Now today we address the 2024 Apec summit in Peru this week following news of a second Trump administration in the US last week. For this I have Stephen Borwick for Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia. Stephen, it's great to have you here.
Nice to be here, thanks.
Right, Stephen. I also have Professor Choi Hyun-jin at Kyunghee University live on the line. Professor Choi, it's good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Right, Stephen, we'll start here in the studio. Let's begin with some basic information about this year's APEC summit in Peru, including its agenda and attendees, of course.
Well, the attendees, I think, will be leaders from across the Asia-Pacific region. And when you look at the agenda, like if I could summarize it in my own words, it seems like the kind of overriding objective is how do we get more people in more parts of the world benefiting from the kind of modern economy. And so the agenda talks a lot about what you alluded to as inclusive and interconnected growth, and parts of that is digitalization, which is the idea of getting people from, these are parts of the world, talking about parts of the world where a lot of the economy is still informal, meaning that these are unofficially, wages are paid on a kind of unofficial basis, and a lot of this money is not taxed. It's circulating throughout the economy, and it's how a lot of people derive their living, but it's kind of officially off the grid. So digital platforms and digital technology presents a great bunch of methods for getting this to be all kind of brought into the formal or the official economy. When I was in India last year, I saw a lot of evidence for this. I even went into slum areas in New Delhi and saw that people were buying groceries and people were shopping at their local stores using a kind of official government-led payment system, like using their phones and connecting to this. And so this is like just one example of how technology can bring the informal economy online. Another point of emphasis is sustainable growth, and the interesting word that they're using there is resilient growth. So, we're now in an era of pretty big climate challenges and various forms of instability. And so how do we create growth models that are able to withstand the challenges of, perhaps natural disaster or war or increase in commodity prices? I think that makes a lot of sense, because it's instead of trying to respond to crises after they happen, but trying to build resilience into the growth model and into the mechanisms for which people are conducting trade and other kinds of economic activity. So should be interesting, should be plenty to talk about.
Right. And Professor Che, do you suppose the relevance of APEC has risen in recent times amid instability within the geopolitical landscape?
I think the APEC has recently become more important due to global instability, including wars in Ukraine and also Middle East, and as well as the rising competition between the United States and China. So APEC is a key platform where it's 21 member states that represent about 40% of the world's population and 60% of global GDP, and they can come together to discuss and cooperate. Then APEC's main goals are to support open trade, sustainable development, and economic cooperation. And I believe these goals are especially valuable during times of global tensions like today, because APEC helps to reduce the negative impact of global conflicts on regional economic stability. For example, at the 2023 APEC summit in San Francisco, leaders focused on key issues like supply chain strength, digital trade, and environmental sustainability. And this discussion highlighted the need for countries to work together on complex global issues. And at the same time, APEC provides a space where the two great powers, the United States and China, can engage in direct discussion and allows them to collaborate on economic interests even as they compete. So at this summit, both countries, US and China, joined in discussion on clean energy, and this shows that the cooperation between the two great powers on shared goals is possible. So therefore, I believe that APEC has become a critical platform for dialogue and cooperation, especially in these times of global conflict and instability.
Right then, keeping in mind what Professor Che has just said, Stephen, the Yun administration, for its part, has used multilateral platforms to direct global focus onto the risks posed by North Korea. How successful do you believe this strategy by the Yun administration has been thus far?
It's an interesting question, and I guess it depends on what you mean by successful. I would say the messaging has been successful in the sense that it's been very clear and it's been very consistent. Throughout Yoon's term, he has really emphasize the risk that North Korea poses not only to the outside world in the form of its weapons developments, but also to its own people. He's talked a lot more about North Korean human rights than some previous South Korean governments. I would say that if you want to take the contrary view, you could say that it has not been successful in the sense that it has not managed to change North Korea's behavior. North Korea is just as dangerous, or perhaps even more dangerous now than it was a couple of years ago when the Yoon administration took office. In that time, North Korea has developed this quite mutually complementary relationship with Russia. We have, as we all know, there are North Korean troops reported to be in the Kursk region of Russia right now, and about to perhaps help the Russian side attempt to retake territory in the Ukraine war. So, I think that at a multinational meeting like this, it's important to at least just speak the truth, and at least for any administration, and I'm somebody who works in journalism, and I have to have at least some kind of baseline belief in the power of truth telling. If you just are consistent in your messaging, and if you really believe something, you've got to communicate it clearly and confidently. But if I could have an interview with President Yoon or with some of his close advisors, like one thing I might ask them is, do you have some goals, like some kind of specific goals here beyond just like this being a communications exercise, and beyond just perhaps informing your counterparts in other countries about what the reality of North Korea is? I think that's very much a worthwhile exercise, and I really think that they should do that. But I think it might be useful when we talk about the North Korea issue as it is broadly known, the North Korea problem, to try to maybe think about like what are some specific steps that could be taken. The critics of Yoon would say that he has not, if you hope to change North Korea's behavior, that ultimately just kind of criticizing them and calling them out on their actions is perhaps not the most productive thing to do. That what you need to do is do more to attempt to engage with North Korea, to negotiate with them. That's a long way of saying that I think Yoon can be confident in his messaging, but I would encourage his administration to perhaps think a little bit deeper about what more they might like to accomplish.
Right, through engagement with North Korea then. Professor Che, what do you believe is the fate of multilateral platforms like APEC under a second Trump administration?
Yes, we need to prepare for the second term of Donald Trump. And I think that the Donald Trump next administration could pose several challenges for multilateral groups like APEC. The first, the Trump's America First policy that tends to favor one-on-one deals rather than group agreements. So this means that the US might be less involved in APEC, as Trump may prefer negotiating directly with individual states instead of working through a regional group. And secondly, the Trump has been skeptical about big international agreements like NATO and also the Paris Climate Agreement. That means he might decide to reduce the US role in APEC, or even step back if he thinks it doesn't directly benefit American interests. So if the US stays in APEC, the Trump might push hard for trade deals that benefit the United States, which could create some tensions within APEC, as this goes against APEC's usual approach based on consensus and cooperation. And there could also be increased tension between the US and China within APEC. Since both countries are part of APEC, the Trump's tough stance on China might make discussion harder and could even divide the group as other members of APEC try to manage this rivalry between the two great powers. And lastly, the Trump administration might not focus on climate goals, which are very important to APEC's mission. And this could slow down APEC's progress on sustainability unless other member states take the lead. So in general, under second Trump term, the APEC could face some challenges like reduced US participation, more focus on trade balances, and possible tensions over climate goals, as well as US-China rivalry.
Right, some valid concerns that are shared by other pundits as well, of course. Stephen, moving forward, there is speculation about a possible summit between President Yoon Suk-yeol and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Peru. What issues might top their agenda should this summit take place?
I thought it was really interesting that China recently allowed visa-free travel for South Korean nationals for, I think it's 15 days. And typically when a country extends more lenient visa policies to another country, it's a sign that they are trying to, kind of ingratiate themselves. They're trying to appear cooperative. And so that could be a kind of a good omen going into the APEC summit. I mean, South Korea and China really they always have tons to discuss. They have such important ties in such a wide variety of areas. They both right now also have kind of slowing economies. I just saw on Arirang earlier today indications that South Korea's exports might be slowing. And so South Korea, over the past couple of quarters, there's been negative growth and then very, very modest growth in the most recent quarter. So if South Korea is going to have an economic recovery that everybody here wants, that's going to some probably pretty significant extent require strong demand from China. The Xi administration, of course, has a lot of different priorities and how they wish to manage their trade relationship with Korea in terms of if they're going to allow unfettered exports of key materials to South Korea, and then there's a whole element of competition when it gets to the high-tech side of things. China would love to be able to produce the kinds of high-end semiconductors that it relies on South Korea for. So there's definitely plenty to discuss, but I wonder if what's happening now, if perhaps with North Korea, quite openly developing more ties with Russia, if perhaps China wishes to, kind of as a quid pro quo, kind of in response, demonstrate that it has a lot of room to boost its influence in South Korea and boost its ties with South Korea. And so the timing might be right for the two sides to come together. I mean, Yoon has had some, before he became president and while he's been in office, he's had some kind of, not always pleasant things to say about China and its potential influence over South Korea. But I think going into the APEC summit, the two sides, the time is ripe for the two sides to sit down and to see where they can benefit each other, which is specifically economically, which is the whole purpose of the APEC summit. So it seems like the pieces fit for a summit of this kind between Yoon and Xi.
Staying with that, Stephen, do you suppose a second Trump administration with its tough trade policies would perhaps encourage countries here in East Asia to cooperate?
That's a big question. This is something I've been thinking a lot. I mean, since last week, my colleagues in Nikkei Asia and I have been deep diving on all these different areas of what a second Trump administration might mean. We've had stories about trade and stories about defense and all the rest. I mean, it's a bit early to say. I mean, Trump is not going to take office until January. And the big question hanging over this interim period that we, of course, cannot answer yet is just to what extent is Trump going to follow through on what he says he's going to do. Specifically, the one that I'm most curious about is when it comes to tariffs, and that's probably the one that's most relevant for East Asia. I think he said that he wants a 20% tariff on all imports and then a 60% tariff on imports from China. I'd love to find at least one economist who thinks that that's a good idea, because I mean, a lot of American manufacturers and American consumers rely on imports from China, and like what's going to happen to the US economy if all of a sudden all of those things are 60% more expensive? And what does that mean for US manufacturers? What does that mean for American households? To answer your question about whether this can spur East Asian cooperation, I mean, I'd like to think that countries in this part of the world already have plenty of incentive to work together, and that Apec provides a forum for that, and other kind of regional gatherings provide a forum for that. One thing we could see is that if Washington does undertake some kind of drastic measure like this, if the major economies in this part of the world then come to feel as though they have something new in common, and that they have a kind of common challenge that it therefore makes sense for them to tackle together. So I've got my popcorn and I've got my pen and notebook, and I'm keen to see what happens.
Right, as are a lot of pundits in this part of the world, of course. Professor Che, I'd like to touch upon a subject that Stephen brought up earlier. South Korea has been included in China's visa-free policy. Are we looking at a boost in bilateral ties going forward?
Yes, China's recent decision to give South Koreans visa-free visit for up to 15 days is a very important step for the two countries' relation. This visa-free policy is expected to increase the travel between South Korea and China, and helping people from both countries connect and understand each other better. And the policy could also boost tourism and business, which would benefit the travel and hospitality industries in both countries. And the travel industry expects higher demand, especially from young South Korean people who want to visit China. So this move may show that China wants to improve its relationship with South Korea, especially during a time of regional and global tensions like today. And some experts see this as a step to strengthen ties with South Korea before upcoming international events like this year's Apec and also G20, and also next year's Apec summit in South Korea. But there are also a few things to consider as well. The first, South Korea has not announced a similar visa-free policy for Chinese citizens yet. So if they do, it could further strengthen the relationship with China. And secondly, while the visa-free policy is a very positive step, it will be important for both countries to continue working together on diplomacy, trade, and also cultural exchanges to keep building a strong relationship. So in general, the China's visa-free policy for South Korea is surely a promising development that could bring the two countries closer together. But however, both sides will need to keep working together to fully benefit from this change.
Right, for sure, of course. Stephen, Japanese daily The Asahi Shimbun recently published an editorial talking about the potential risks of Mr. Trump's America First agenda. What are some of the concerns and possible countermeasures being shared by pundits here in this part of the world with regard to Trump's agenda, of course?
Well, the first story that I did after the election results came in was about the defense angle of things, and specifically how the U.S. has large military presences in both South Korea and Japan, and Trump has, over the years, has kind of depicted South Korea and Japan as sort of not paying their fair share of this, and then accused them of kind of taking unfair advantage of the U.S. And he's talked about wanting to either pull those troops out or have South Korea and Japan pay a whole lot more for them. I think that presents a number of risks, and that's definitely a concern that a lot of pundits are raising. I mean, I've done some reporting, and I've talked to experts who have pointed out that even if Trump says that he wants to pull those troops out, it's not like he can make it happen right away. There are legal and there are bureaucratic hurdles to that. The U.S. and South Korea have a a legal agreement that I think is in effect for about the next 5 years when it comes to how that relationship plays out, how they finance it, the kind of terms of engagement. So that is longer than Trump's 4-year term. So just because, I think we need to be careful that, like, just because a politician like Trump says that he wants to do something, there are still a number of guardrails in the American system domestically and in the nature of foreign affairs and the nature of how the U.S. interacts with countries like China and Japan. So I think we need to take some of what Trump has said on the campaign trail with a bit of a grain of salt for now. There's also an interesting angle in that Trump is going, when he takes office, his big priority when it comes to Asia is going to be containing China. And I had one expert tell me that once he sets about attempting to do that, he's going to quickly learn that he needs South Korea and Japan's assistance for that. The U.S. cannot simply do that alone. And when it comes to presenting a security, a defense counter to China, U.S. troops in South Korea and Japan are an essential part of that. So he's probably not, when he looks at the bigger picture of what he's trying to accomplish in Asia, he's probably going to come to see the alliances with South Korea and Japan as helpful towards achieving his bigger goals. And I think he will most likely tone down that kind of rhetoric after he's taken office. It was useful in the lead up to the presidency, but like he's won the popular vote. He's won the presidency. So now that he's going to be dealing directly with his counterparts in other countries, I expect a kind of toning down.
Right. Well, Mr. Trump, Professor Che, has spoken about meeting with President Yoon Suk-yeol in the near future. That being said, what issues might be at the top of their agenda?
The major issue might be the defense cost-sharing agreement, as just noted by Stephen. Trump may want to renegotiate this agreement, asking South Korea to pay more. And in fact, during presidential rally, Donald Trump, asked for 10 times more money than we have agreed with President Biden. So, so this Trump's push for increased payment could lead to big discussion on this issue. And the next topic will be North Korea. So another U.S.-North Korea summit might happen during Trump's term. And many Korean people and I really hope Donald Trump reaffirms his commitment to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula without recognizing North Korea as a nuclear state. And the third issue will be a U.S.-Korea alliance and also security cooperation with Japan. And many experts suggest that President Yoon should make efforts to show Trump that South Korea is really positive about the alliance and set a stronger foundation for cooperation.
Right. All right, Professor Che, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. And Stephen, here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching, and do join us again tomorrow.